Let's begin with the word of prayer. Dear Father in heaven, we are so thankful for the time that we have to study every morning, and we invite your presence through thy Holy Spirit into our hearts and into this study. We ask, Lord, that as we look at the 2520, as we examine the development of the understanding of this truth in this message, that you can guide and direct us, that you can help us to understand the points at issue, and that we can have an experience with you. Be with each person. May your angels watch over them, and be with us now, we pray. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, good morning, everyone. So we started this study on the 2520 yesterday. As you know, we've been going through the foundation, and I decided to break this up into a separate study just for the convenience of people finding it on YouTube. Because when you have, nearly 200 presentations on examining the foundation, people aren't really going to know where to look if they want to find a particular topic. So this is the next logical step from where we were in examining the foundation, in that is the next thing that comes on the scene is the understanding of the 2520. But it develops rather slowly at first. Now, what you have in front of you here on the screen, this is from the Eatonville presentations in 2008. So this isn't the earliest presentation of the 2520, but it's one that Jeff had already been teaching it for a couple of years. And you can see here he has sort of the prophetic mirror. Now, what is it we notice about this 7 times 25-20 years diagram? What's one thing we notice here? So we can see the 65 years, Isaiah's prophecy. Hopefully you can see that. Depends on how big a screen you have. But down on the bottom, it's got Isaiah prophecy, Isaiah 7 verse 8, 742 BC. And the 65 years going to 677, and its division into 19 years and 46 years. But if we look at the far right side at the top, it only goes up to 1844. So what has Jeff not noticed by 2008?
Yeah, he hasn't seen the connection to 1863.
Yeah, so there isn't the connection to 1863 at this point. So he doesn't have the full prophetic mirror. He's got the two 2520s laid on top of each other. Now, as we go through this series, the basic thing that we're going to try to establish as we go through Jeff's understanding initially, we're going to see that he's taking Hiram Edson's two periods of 1260 years, and he's taking Miller's 2520, and he's putting them together, but he's not noticing everything about them. Now, one of the things that we're going to see later on is that the 2520 for Judah also has a natural division. So the 2520 for Northern Israel, we can see the natural division is the 2 periods of 1260 years. But where is the natural division for the 2520 for Judah?
Are you asking, is there a halfway point, or, I mean?
Well, I'm not talking about a halfway point. It has a division. That is, it's divided. It's not just 25-20 years. because in our understanding of how this comes about, how to understand the 2520, Jeff's understanding is Miller's. He just sees the 7 times in Leviticus 26 and multiplies it by 360. But that's not really how we come to understand the 2520 for Judah.
You mean the 220 and 2300?
Yeah, so the 220 and the 2300. Now, even just without going into the 220 years, specifically how those are structured, why would we know that the 2300 is part of the 2520 for Judah?
Well, we're lining this up where we have the 677 as the beginning point.
Yeah.
And it ties also the 220 that was just pointed out ties back to the 457, which is when after the third decree had been issued.
Okay, right. So, but even if we're not dealing with the construction of that 220, Ellen White in The Great Controversy, page 351, tells us that they're connected, right?
Okay.
So this is this statement that people often use to reject the 2520 because they read into it their preconceptions, right? And everybody knows hopefully what I'm talking about. So on page 351 here, I'm just going to switch screens because we're familiar with this. And we're going to go through all this in detail. I'm just kind of giving a summation of some of these things that we're going to have to look at. So here we have this, here it is. The experience of the disciples who preached the gospel of the kingdom at the first advent of Christ had its counterpart in the experience of those who proclaimed the message of his second advent. As the disciples went out preaching, the time is fulfilled, the kingdom of God is at hand, so Miller and his associates proclaimed that the longest and last prophetic period brought to view in the Bible was about to expire, that the judgment was at hand, and the everlasting kingdom was to be ushered in. The preaching of the disciples in regard to time was based on the 70 weeks of Daniel 9. The message given by Miller and his associates announced the termination of the 2300 days of Daniel 8:14, of which the 70 weeks form a part. The preaching of each was based upon a fulfillment of a different portion of the same great prophetic period. So Ellen White is telling us here about the 2520, but she's doing it sort of in code. That is, she's saying it in the language of the Millerites. And so the fourth generation doesn't recognize that the last and longest prophetic period brought to view in the Bible is the 2520. They read into it that that's the 2300 days. And so when she says that, and then she says the judgment was at hand, the judgment that was at hand is the 2300 days. And the everlasting kingdom, which was to be ushered in, is the 1335. Here she's mentioning in sort of a code that a Millerite would understand that this is the 2520, the 2300 days, and the 1335. These are the three prophetic periods that Miller was given the commencement of, correct?
You're speaking of the golden chain of truth.
Well, Ellen White says he was given the commencement of the chain of truth, right? And that would be when he talks about the commencements, the three commencements that he's given is 677, 457 BC, and 508 AD.
Right.
Right. So these are the three periods. And so Ellen White is speaking to somebody who's looking back at the foundation, who's going to the old paths, and only then can you understand this paragraph. Now, if we say the preaching of each, that is, the preaching of the 2,300 days and the 70 weeks, was a different portion of the same great prophetic period, you would have to say that they're both preaching a different portion of the 2,300 days. But is the 2,300 days a portion of the 2,300 days?
Would you repeat that question?
Is the 2,300 days a portion of the 2,300 days?
No, it's not a portion at all.
Right. So it's not a portion. You can't say that the whole of something is a portion. So they couldn't have been preaching a portion of the 2,300 days, because we know that the preaching of the Millerites was not based upon a portion of the 2,300 days. It was based upon this 2,300 days, which is a portion of the 2520. So here, Ellen White is telling you that the 2,300 days is a portion of some longer period. So that means we would have to take the 2,300 days and see it as part of the 2520. And so this would be the natural division of the 2520. We could also say that the 70 weeks is a portion of the 2520, though it's not what I would call a natural division. That is, it doesn't give us a division of it. The 220 and the 2,300 together make 2520, and that would be the natural division. So both of these periods have a natural division. Now, in a sense, you can see that Jeff has placed, when I go back here to this diagram, he has placed 457 BC in this diagram, but he hasn't marked out the period of time from 677 to 457. He hasn't noted that it's 220 years. Now, 220 is a symbol of restoration. That number shows up again and again. It's also even the number 22, from the time that Joseph has his two dreams to when they are fulfilled, is 22 years later. And what is 22?
Beside it being 1/10 of 220?
Yeah, just by itself. What is 22?
That's a doubling of 11.
Yeah, it's a doubling of 11. And it's also two twos, right?
Right.
So it's a doubling within a doubling, right? And we know that Joseph has two dreams. 11 years later, the butler and the baker have two dreams. And then 11 years after that, Joseph's dream is fulfilled. And so the doubling, a symbol of the doubling, or the doubling is a symbol of a prophetic mirror, because a prophetic mirror is a doubling. A mirror is a doubling, isn't it?
I would agree.
Yeah. So this mirror that's been given, what is the mirror in the Bible?
A further way of examining symbols.
Okay. But in second Corinthians chapter 3 and in the book of James chapter 1, what do Paul and James say the mirror is?
My mind runs to the quote that, "For now I see through a glass darkly."
Okay, so there's that one. But they also talk about the glass. A man looks in a glass. What is that glass that they look into?
The mare, or the mara, excuse me.
Okay, well, in this case, it's the law, the royal law, the law of liberty. that when we look into the law, we see ourselves. That is, there's a doubling. And these are points that, just there's lots of things about this mirror in Scripture. Even in Isaiah chapter 8, when he says to write the prophecy on a mirror, right? It says, it doesn't use the word mirror in the King James, but they're going to inscribe it on a mirror. This is significant. So the mirror is the law. The law is a mirror. It's part of the covenant. And now going into Dwight's studies that we're seeing that the covenant is dealing with the 2520, specifically the blessings and the curses, which is a mirror. Can we agree that the blessings and curses are a mirror?
I think the blessings and the curses are two sides of the same mirror.
Yes. So you have, an example is in the Song of Solomon. If you read in the Song of Solomon, you find it's written in a chiasm. And so it works towards the center, and it works towards the center in these positive ideas of this relationship. And then it gets to the marriage. And once it gets to the marriage, it works in reverse order in a negative way relating to the relationship. I don't know if anybody's ever noticed that in the Song of Solomon, but it has this structure, which is a prophetic mirror or a chiasm, a literary chiasm. So you can see that sometimes a chiasm can be the opposite. That is, when you look in a mirror, you see things that are opposite of each other. And that's why when you look at the 7 times here for Northern Israel, you got 2 different aspects. That is, the mirror is not identical. You have paganism and papalism. One's earthly counterfeit, one's a heavenly counterfeit. When we look at the 430 years chiasm, you have Canaan and Egypt, the land of promise, the land of bondage. And so in a mirror, you're going to see a reflection of something, but it's not identical. That is, it's the opposite of that, even though it looks the same. So these structures that are given us here in this prophetic mirror, and especially as it relates to the connection of these two 2520s, becomes a pattern or a structure that we see happening again and again. It is sometimes we see prophetic mirrors, but they can be part of other structures. That is, the 2520 for Judah isn't a prophetic mirror, but put together with the 2520 for Northern Israel, it does become a prophetic mirror. But it also has its own structure, which isn't a mirror. Now, when we look at the center, though, of the 2520 for Judah, what do we find? And I'm trying to remember myself because I haven't done it in a while. But what's the center of the 2520 for Judah? How would we determine what the center is? Anybody know what I'm talking about?
Just minus 1260 from 1844.
Okay, so if you minus 1260 from 1844, you would get 584. Now, is there any significance in 584?
Not that I know of.
Okay. So does anybody know of how somebody has found the center of 1844. I can't remember it right now. I'm going to have to try to find it in my notes.
Finding the center of 1844, or
From,
finding
from the chiasm from 1840 to 1844. So the structure from 677 to 1844, is there a way that we can understand its center that relates in some way to a structural chiasm, even though 584 AD doesn't have any significance? So I can't remember how to do it, but there is a way. So we're going to have to look at that. So there are ways in which we can understand it as a chiasm, and it's going to give us some light. I just can't remember what it is, how to do it. But we can see here, at least, that in 2008, Jeff still hasn't figured out the prophetic mirror. Now, I do know in Habakkuk's tables, he does find out, and I'm just going to bring it up here. And Habakkuk's tables is from 2012. So in 2012, by then, Jeff is going to understand the prophetic mirror. So we're going to see how that comes about and the significance of that. Now, I also, so I sent you these by email for anybody who I have their email. Also, this article, this is Jeff's notes for the tragedy in Newport. And the significance of these notes is that Jeff is going to deal with the comparison of the two Newports. Now, what did I say are the two Newports that, so we got, he's going to go through Portland, Maine and Portland, Oregon. So what is the significance of the two Newports? What places did I mark as, for Newport, as significant? We have Newport, Washington. And what's the first Newport?
New Hampshire.
Okay, Newport, New Hampshire. Now, it's interesting that in these notes, that Jeff is going to deal with Newport, Rhode Island. He's not going to look at Newport, New Hampshire. So, and I always thought it was Newport, Rhode Island, where the charts were taken to. But here, Jeff isn't addressing that. He's not addressing the first time the charts are being presented. So I found that interesting. He's going to deal with Newport, Rhode Island. And so I think he kind of missed back in 2012 the significance of Newport, New Hampshire. I don't think he understood that in 2012. Or this isn't 2000, yeah, this is 2012, correct. So there's going to be a number of things that we're going to have to look at in these charts. Now, in Habakkuk's two tables, just getting back to here, you are going to see the prophetic mirror being presented in its completeness with 1863. So he is going to understand 1863. And let me just find it here. So, and we're going to go through this stuff in detail. Right now, I'm just kind of showing you what we're going to do.
There's one other, while you're getting this ready, there's one other point that I find very interesting.
Okay.
Now, the Newport, Washington Seventh-day Adventist Church, at the time of the tragedy in Newport,
yeah,
their address was listed as being 777 Lilac Lane.
Yeah.
They have now had the address changed to being 100 Lilac Lane.
Even though they're at the same location.
Yes.
Yeah, I found that weird.
They wanted nothing to do with anything that could be said to be 7 times.
Oh, so that's the reason you're certain that that's why they changed it?
Well, the change came not long after Jeff had been up there and given his presentations. The change also came not very long, I mean, within just a couple of years after Steve Wahlberg and his crew began to locate all of their information up there in Newport. So I can't say that they did this, but I mean, all of a sudden, instead of having 777 applied with them, they are now choosing to not have that as part of their identification.
Okay. Yeah, so so that's, what's the name of the town that's in?
Pete, I'll think for a moment.
Is that in Newport?
It is in Newport, yes.
Okay. Yeah, just wondering. Yeah, so yeah, it still exists. So, I mean, the address still exists. But yeah, they just changed. They changed their mailing address, I guess. The physical address still exists, according to Google Maps.
Well, I'm looking right now at their Facebook page as well.
Yeah.
Because on their Facebook page, they show it as being 100 North Lilac Lane.
Yeah, so they somehow changed it, even though that physical address still exists.
Right.
As a physical address. So they just intentionally changed it. Which is kind of odd that they would do that, but I mean, I wish my address was 777 Lilac Lane, but okay. Yeah, so there's some interesting things regarding what happened in Newport. Now, just going back to the Habakkuk's 2 tables here, you can see here they're going to talk about the 1863 chart being introduced. I'm just typing in searching 1863 in this document. Yeah, so they're going to see significance in 1863. I guess if I looked up prophetic mirror, which is what I originally looked up. I don't have it in this, no, prophetic. Maybe I'll put it here, mirror. Yeah, so the mirror. Yeah, they're going to talk about the looking glass vision. But even in this chart here, they don't really talk about, or in these Habakkuk's 2 tables, they don't really talk about the prophetic mirror. At least I can't find the word mirror except one place in this document. So the time that the prophetic mirror becomes really significant is a bit later. So I'm not sure, I still haven't been able to find the first time that Jeff recognizes or uses this term mirror. I'm going to continually try to look. Now, he does talk about a prophetic mirror in his notebooks, but when he talks in notebook 3, but when he talks about a prophetic mirror there, it's not the prophetic mirror of the 2520. So this term prophetic mirror shows up in different places. It even shows up in Millerite writings, but again, they're not talking about the prophetic mirror of the 2520. They're using it more like a mirror of prophecy that you look at and prophecy becomes a mirror, but they're not looking at it as a structure. Now, I also, this is another document which, and I do want to go through this document in a bit more detail, because this is what are termed the stones from 1989 through 2001. And these are the different presentations, the main presentations that Jeff did. And in that history prior to 2000. And then after 9/11, you're going to see that he's got the ozone, which that's the one where 9/11 is being understood. And then December 2005, Hot Springs, you see the title is the 2520. So when Jeff says it was in 2005 that he came to understand the 2520, we can see that it is in 2005. Now, this isn't the first time he presented the 2520. This is the first time that he presents it as the main topic. But he had presented the 2520 in some meetings, and I can't remember where he said these meetings were, where he just had run out of his notes and decided in the last meeting to draw these two 2520s and put them on the whiteboard. And in illustrating that, he saw the initial application of the prophetic mirror, the two periods of 46 years at the beginning and the end. But when Jeff's describing something that he saw earlier, we often write into it or read into it things that we now understand. So I don't think that he really understood the significance of it as being a prophetic mirror and what that meant chronologically, because we can see in 2008 and even in 2012, that's not the focus of the 2520, is not the prophetic mirror. But I do remember watching Habakkuk's two tables, and I believe it was because he ended up completing them in the spring of 2013. But I believe it was still in 2012. And he had drawn the two lines and put not just the 46 years, but the two 19-year periods at the beginning and the end. And that to me really clicked. So in 2012, I had been presenting by October of 2012. I began presenting the prophetic mirror. Mostly I was writing it out on napkins for people or pieces of paper. I wasn't doing public presentations on it. But I was focusing upon this. Now, this is one of my documents here. This is just what I call the 2520 fact sheet. So when we deal with the 2520, if I have the whole diagram here. Yeah, here it is. So this is what I ended up presenting in 2012. Based upon, I saw Jeff do this presentation in 2012 with the 19 years at the beginning and the end. Now, what I had done is I sort of expanded it a little bit as far as the events in 742 and 1863. That is, when Jeff presented it, he merely talked about the Civil War at the beginning and the ending. And I think he might have mentioned that the North was Confederate in 742 and the South was Confederate in 1863. But I look at it in a little bit more detail, because in 742, the prophecy is given. In 1863, the prophecy is hidden. And this becomes something that I notice about the 1863 chart, that it contains both the 2520 and also the entire prophetic mirror. The Civil War, of course, I mentioned as well. Now, the kingship, it says, will be broken. And we know that the kingship is restored in 1863. That is, the people ask for a king and they get a king in 1863. It says they will be not a people, at the beginning of the prophecy in 742. And in 1863, we become a denominated people. It says you will not be established in 742. And we know that the SDA Church is established in 1863. The first part is dealing with literal Israel. The end is marking spiritual Israel. And the land that's being talked about in 742 is the land of Israel, the literal land of Israel. But the land that's really being dealt with in 1863 is the spiritual land of Israel. Now, this prophetic mirror, this 2,604 year prophetic mirror, the first time that I presented this, that I recognized it was 2,604 years. I'd been presenting this, but not calling it the 2,604 prophetic mirror. This would have been in 2014, maybe the end of 2013. Actually, no, it's probably the beginning of 2013. I'm trying to remember when I actually figured out the 2,604 years. I'm going to have to look it up. But when I presented it the first time at Colin's Bible study, he was kind of had this wry smile the whole time I was presenting this. And at the end, he said, come and see what I did this week. And I'd figured it out this week, and he had figured out the same thing, that it was 2,604 years, which for me was a confirmation that somebody else was figuring out the same things I was an affirmation that I was on the right track. Now, this has become even more significant over time. And so I deal with, how was the prophecy hidden on the 1863 chart, looking at this 1 week. And I take this from the 1843 chart, and we can see that if we just change the 30 to a 31, the year of the crucifixion, the midst of the week, we get 2,604. So these things we're going to look at in more detail. Now, I want to deal with today. So I just wanted to give you an overview of some of these things, some of the things we're going to be looking at. I'll be sending more documents as we go on. And I thought about whether I should, read through these different documents. And I'm going to read parts, so I have to actually figure out exactly what I'm going to read. I was mostly just able to get these documents collected together. But one of the things I want to address is 742 BC. So we're going to go through the prophetic mirror, and we're going to look a bit more detail in some of the chronology of it. And some of this, of course, is review, because it's called Reviewing the 2520. We're going to look at 723. We're going to look at 677. We're going to look at 457. We're going to look at the 4 times. We're going to look at 538 again. We're going to look at 1798. We're going to look at 1844. We're going to look at these different dates. Now, one of the things, and I'm going to write this on the whiteboard here in a minute. So maybe I'll do here, before I get into 742 in detail, I'm going to look at another paper. And maybe I'll show it off of this paper. Okay, here's just another look. I'm going to do it instead of here. I'm going to use my, oops. I'm going to stop share here. Just hang on a sec. Okay. Now, this paper here that I did a few years ago, a couple of years ago, called Prophetic Mere Probability. And I've presented this a number of times. But when it comes to this prophetic mirror, we have these different dates. We have 742, 723, 677, 457, because that's that natural division of the 2520 for Judah. 538, which is the natural division for the 2520 for Israel. 1798, marking the end of that, Israel's 2520, and 1844, marking the end of Judah's 2520. And 1863, marking the end of the prophetic mirror. So when we look at these dates, all of these 8 dates have a particular, these years have a particular quality that is represented in each one of these years. And that has to do with the leap years. So as we know that the Jewish calendar has 12 months of 29 and a half days, roughly, that makes up a year of 354 days. And since it falls 11 days short of a solar year, every 2 or 3 years, they add an extra month. And they call that an embolism or a leap year or a leap month. And so they have this system of every 2nd or 3rd year, they have 13 months in the year. They have a second Adar, Adar being the 12th month. So they have 2 12th months, I guess a 12th and a 13th month. And in order to look at this to add these embolisms, we can see that since they happen only every 2nd or 3rd year, that you could have, if you had these, each of these years follows an embolismic year. That is, 742 BC begins after a 13th month. That is, the Jewish year, 742 BC, that begins in the spring, is following an embolism. That means that that year has been delayed by 1 month. The same is true of 723 BC. The same is true of 677. The same is true of 457, of 538 AD, of 1798, of 1844, and 1863. So they've all been delayed by 1 month. And we know in 1844 that's the case, because the Jewish year ended on March 21st. But the Millerites came to understand that the year ended, or the year began at sunset on April 18th. So the first day of the first month is what we would call April 19th. So we know that about 1844, but that is the case with each one of these dates in the prophetic mirror. And this is something that we obviously didn't know when we developed this prophetic mirror. That is, we weren't using this. So it's something that would be an independent witness of the rarity of this prophetic mirror. Now, when you do that and you take each of these, the chances that you're going to have an embolism is I have it here. So it's basically 1 in 2.7, 1 to 2.7. That is, the chance of a year being an embolism is 19. There's in a Metonic cycle, there's 19 years. 7 of those are embolismic years. So you just take 19 divided by 7 and you get 1 in 2.7. So if you were just going to take any year, the chances or the odds that it's going to have a 13th month or follow that year is going to be delayed by 1 month is 1 in 2.7. Now, if you picked 2 different years, that would be 1 in 7.4. You would multiply 2.7 by itself. But if you're going to have 8 of those occurrences, the chances that would occur randomly is 1 in 2,946. Does that make sense to people? That the fact that each of these dates, that's nearly 1 in 3,000. That is, if you picked 8 years and you were to look at whether they are been delayed by 1 month on the Jewish calendar, you'd have to do that on average nearly 3,000 times to just find a match of 8 dates. Does that make sense to people? I'm trying to explain this in the simplest way possible. Anybody not quite grasp what I'm saying?
In other words, what you're saying is that it's extremely odd and rare that each of these would be embolismic years.
Yeah, that they're actually delayed 1 month. So the year before them is an embolism. So each of these have this particular characteristic. That is, the characteristic of 1844 is also true of every single one of the dates in the prophetic mirror. And so this wasn't something that we noticed until, I think it was 2018 that I had worked this out. It was 2018. Now, I also noticed something else. When you have a leap year, that can occur, really close to the equinox or very far away from the equinox. That is, it's the first new moon after the spring equinox that determines the start of the year. But that first new moon after the spring equinox, it can be, up to like 28, 29 days after the spring equinox. But in these cases, in every one of these cases, it's actually very close to the spring equinox that the year is being or the extra month is being added. So I'm going to just show you here. This is a diagram of 742 BC. And you can see here on the 29th of March, and that's because this is a Julian calendar. So we know that the equinox is the 20th or the 21st. And in this case, it's just that we're using the Julian calendar, and the Julian calendar drifts. So if you looked at the Gregorian date, I believe that this is the 20th, might be the 21st of March. But in the Julian calendar, it's the 29th of March is the equinox. And it says the spring equinox is going to happen at 5:56. So it happened at 5:56 in 742 BC. So 5:56 a.m. Now, you can see over here on the 27th is what we call the astronomical new moon. But the astronomical new moon is not the new moon that the Jews use. That is, they're going to wait until they see the first visible crescent. And that's not going to happen until, and I have a chart here. So in 742 BC, we have the conjunction. That conjunction is that when you have the astronomical new moon. And then you have the equinox on the 29th. Now, the first visibility is going to be, now this is in March. The first visibility, that is the new moon, would have been seen the day before the equinox. So that means you would have to have an extra month added. But it's just very close. The difference in time, so I figured this all out mathematically, of when the equinox occurs, that is the actual equinox and the visibility. And I took the separations of times between them. The longest period is 41 hours and 11 minutes difference. And now some of them are before and some of them are after, but of course the equinox, you have to wait until the sunset the next day. So I don't want to try to complicate it here. But in every one of these cases, you're going to have the new moon sighted before the spring equinox has officially arrived. And so you're going to have an extra month. And so I have all these different calculations. So equinox to visibility, the conjunction to visibility, conjunction to equinox, all these different measurements. And then I figure out how likely those things are to occur. And then I add up the probability that this could occur randomly. And the number I have is 639 trillion, 470 billion, 527 million, 272,000 to 1 odds. That is, the odds are 1 in 6.3947 times 10 to the power of 11. Now, that's, what would we call that type of probability? Could you have something like that just happen randomly?
No.
No. So it's design, right?
It has to be designed.
Yeah, it has to be designed. So the very fact that we have this prophetic mirror that we constructed based upon Bible prophecy, and that it has this particular characteristic about each of these years that they have this extra month added. That is, they're going to start 1 month later than they would have. It confirms a number of things. One is it confirms how we establish the biblical calendar. That is, we have this prophetic mirror, and we have this way in which we have determined how the Jewish year starts, that it's the first new moon after the spring equinox. We're not using the rabbinic calendar. If we use the rabbinic calendar, these characteristics wouldn't apply. In 1844, you wouldn't have had a leap year. Now, we could say, and it would be true, that actually every one of the rabbinic years, because it's so close, they're going to actually start 1 month earlier. So that is, when we look at this chart here, the Jews would have begun, for instance, in 742, they would have seen the first visibility on the 28th. And so the 29th of March would have been the first day of the first month. So you could actually say with the rabbinic calendar, you would also have the same characteristic. It would just be different. But the fact that we are determining this in this particular way, we confirm that we're understanding these calendars correctly, that this movement in establishing the 2520 and the prophetic mirror and its natural divisions, that we now have something that confirms our understanding of the calendars. It also confirms, of course, the prophetic mirror itself, because these are extremely unlikely odds. And I figured out, how this could be as far as, if everybody on Earth bought a lottery ticket, how many times, would they have to buy a lottery ticket and all these kinds of things. I can't remember I might even show it in here. I don't know, probably not. I showed it in one of my other papers. I use that illustration, but this would be extremely, extremely unlikely that you could have something like this. That means if you were going to pick 8 random dates, you would have to do this on average nearly 640 trillion times to find that same combination of dates. So it is design. So this prophetic mirror, everything that God has shown this movement, he showed it to us over time. That is, nobody picked these dates, obviously, because of this prophetic mirror probability. The dates came to us from the study of Bible prophecy. Now, when we deal with something like probabilities, there are some people who criticize this using Ellen White's a statement about mere probability. Now, is this mere, and not mere like M-I-R-R-O-R, mere, but M-E-R-E? Is this mere probability?
That'd be like saying that this is nothing but happenstance.
Right. Now, so when she talks about mere probability, she's talking about a completely different idea. And I see if I can find it. Let me just see. It doesn't, I can't seem to find it there. I can't find it right now. I'm going to have to look for it. Just hang on. Maybe I'm just going to look up. Because I don't think she uses the word probability too often. Because she uses that word six times. Okay, so I'm going to have to find the statement. I mean, the statement, I believe, was brought up by Larry Lesher. I think he's the one that found it. Could have been Larry Hine. I can't remember. But when she talks about probability in that context, she's talking about making plans, I believe, and to base our, I can't remember exactly what the statement is. So I'm going to have to find it. I'm not going to try to butcher the statement by misquoting it. So, you know, and I have this paper here where I go through each of the different years, and you can see always that the spring equinox is going to be very close to the conjunction, and that the first visibility is going to occur before the spring equinox. And I explain a little bit about how the equinox is determined itself. So one of the things about the equinox is that the Jews determine it at sunset, not as we do astronomically. Okay. So now I want to begin looking at 742. So Isaiah's prophecy and Leviticus 26, of course. Now, when we go to Leviticus 26, and we should all be well read in Leviticus 26. We should know there's the blessings and curses, and in looking at this, that this is about the covenant. But this blessings and curses are based upon entering into the land and allowing the land to rest. Then if you allow the land to rest, you'll receive a blessing. And if you don't, you'll receive a curse. And these are what I call the natural consequences of following the rest of the land. That is, there was a benefit to them to do so, and that if they abused the land, that they would have these natural consequences that would result from not having the land rest. So, I mean, God would remove his blessing as well, because it was dependent upon them obeying God. But then there was going to be these punishment, as it says here, punishment for disobedience, or these corrective chastisements. And we know that it's in Leviticus 26, verse 18. If ye will not yet for all this hearken unto me. So you see the consequences of what's going to happen if they don't obey the rest of the land. But if that doesn't reform them, that is, if they don't hearken unto the God because of this, they're going to be punished 7 times more for your sins. Now this, we're going to look into this in a lot more detail, but this idea of 7 times more How did the Millerites come to understand this? How did they see this 7 times more for your sins? Particularly, how did William Miller understand this?
It seems as though you saw it as 7 years.
Okay, so he saw it as 7 years. And we're going to look at some of the criticisms that were brought against our understanding of the 2520 and Miller's understanding of the 2520 that sort of were a misrepresentation. And I'm going to see if I can find here quickly. Okay, it's not there, so I'm going to look here. Okay, I can find lots of Himes stuff. I don't want Joshua V. Himes yet. Okay. Okay, we've got lots of different articles on this. I wish they had a quicker way of finding out who wrote them articles. Okay, I'll do it this way. So what's the first 7 times? What do we see here in this passage? I'll have to find that later.
Breaking the pride of the power.
Okay, I will break the pride of your power. I will make your heaven as iron and your earth as brass. And your strength shall be spent in vain, for your land shall not yield her increase, neither shall the trees of the land yield their fruits. Now, what is this reference to increase? The land shall not yield her increase. What does that mean?
Literally, the crops would not grow properly, or?
Okay, so the crops aren't going to grow properly. Now, the first time it talks about this is in Leviticus 26, verse 4. So it's going to talk about about the blessings. So it says, ye shall keep my Sabbaths and reverence my sanctuary. I am the Lord. If ye walk in my statutes and keep my commandments and do them, then I will give you rain in due season, and the land shall yield her increase, and the trees of the field shall yield their fruit. So this rain in due season, what is that?
The early and latter rain.
Yeah, the early and latter rain, or the former and latter rain. And so this increase, what is this increase? I mean, we know it's about the crops in context. But what are these typifying? The land shall yield her increase, and the trees of the field shall yield their fruit. If we were going to apply this spiritually at the end of the world, what would this be?
The outpouring of the Holy Spirit.
So it's the outpouring of the Holy Spirit. And what would be the land yielding her increase? what would be increased? What does the harvest represent?
The harvest represents the incoming of other souls, but it also can represent our knowledge increasing.
Okay, so it can represent our knowledge, but I would think the primary way is that if we have the Holy Spirit, we will be able to accomplish the task that God wants to give us, which is the spreading of the gospel. And the trees of the field yielding their fruit, what are the trees of the field yielding their fruit symbols of? By their fruits ye shall know them. Isn't this have to do with character?
Yes.
Okay. So we know that this isn't just about the land of Israel. This is about the end of the world. And of course, it's interesting we have Leviticus 26, verse 4 with this, because that's 264. 26th day of the fourth month. But anyway, we have this symbol here about the increase. So when they break the pride of their power, it's attached to heaven as iron, earth as brass. That would be that you don't have the Holy Spirit being poured out. So you can plant your seed, but your strength shall be spent in vain. For the land shall not yield her increase, neither shall the trees of the land yield their fruits. Now, how can we connect this to the 2520 prophetic mirror? Because we always take the pride of your power part. And so we know that. Why is this heaven? Your heaven is iron, your earth is brass. And this reference to, which is the reference to the withholding of the latter and former and latter rain. And also the fact that the land shall not yield her increase and the trees of the land yield their fruits.
Well, if we look at this symbolically,
yeah,
iron is a metal of judgment, and so is brass.
Mm-hmm.
Because your iron shows that you are in captivity.
Mm-hmm.
And then brass, how would you see that?
Okay, well, there's lots of different ways to see it. So I'm not just going to look at iron and brass as symbols.
Okay.
But the question that I'm asking is, how would we apply this? Like when we apply this to Manasseh's captivity, for instance, in 677, we can see the breaking of the pride of the power. But it says, your heaven will be as iron, your earth as brass.
Okay.
We usually never make an application of this to 677.
Right, but okay, you're making the application on Manasseh chiastically to that of what happened with Nebuchadnezzar.
Right. So that's where I would make this connection, that we have to see that the breaking of the pride of the power also connects with Daniel chapter 4. Right. So when you go to Daniel chapter 4, we can see that Nebuchadnezzar is in the pride of his power. Right. That's what this is about.
Correct.
And he's given this vision of a dream, right? And he saw this tree. And actually, one of the things I've done is I've looked at all of the nouns that are in Daniel chapter 4 and the nouns that are in Leviticus 26. And you'll see that there's a match of about 20 or so nouns that aren't very common generally, especially to see them in two different chapters. So one of the things we can see is that Daniel chapter 4 is a reference to Leviticus 26. But the symbols that are being used here are symbols that are used in Leviticus 26. But we can see in verse 15, nevertheless, the stump of the roots in the earth, even leave the stump of the roots in the earth, even with a band of iron and brass, and the tender grass of the field, and let it be wet with the dew of heaven, and let his portion be with the beasts in the grass of the earth. So you can see the iron and brass is mentioned here, as well as the 7 times. Let 7 times pass over him. And that's mentioned 4 times in Daniel 4, and also 4 times in Leviticus 26, that you have the phrase 7 times. Now, Daniel 4 is written in Aramaic or Chaldean or Syriac, whatever you want to call it. It's not written in Hebrew. And so the phrases are slightly different. And we can also see that the word times is a separate word, where in Leviticus 26, times is actually added, even though it's not in italics. The word times is not there in the Hebrew. It just says 7. But nonetheless, we can see that it has that parallel. So this, the symbols that are here are important to understand. We don't place the iron and brass literally when it comes to Manasseh's captivity, other than that he is taken in fetters of iron. So there is that, I guess you could say, that there's that connection, because he's going to be carried away to Babylon by Esarhaddon. But definitely the breaking of the pride of the power, the pride of your power, is the captivity of Manasseh. Now, this pride of your power is also used in Ezekiel, but in a completely different sense. Anybody know what I'm talking about?
That is when he is referring to the sanctuary.
Yeah, so he refers to the sanctuary as the pride of your power. And I can't remember which verse it is. I think it's called they don't say pride of your power. I think they use a different phrase, but in the Hebrew, it's identical. So there are things that we have to learn about Leviticus 26 in regard to its fulfillment. Now, Ellen White makes a statement that Leviticus 26 was fulfilled partially in the time of the judges, but received a more complete fulfillment with the captivity of northern Israel in Assyria and of Judah in Babylon. So Leviticus 26 has partial fulfillments in the time of the judges, but a more complete fulfillment in the history of northern Israel and southern Israel. So Israel and Judah both receive a fulfillment of that. But we know that they become types. So that's going to be another important point that we want to look at. Now, the primary place, and I was trying to find it here on the disc, but I'm going to have to find the statement I'm looking for, has to do with Isaiah 7. Now, if you look on the 1843 chart, you're going to see that it's going to talk about Leviticus 26. And it's interesting. It says 28 to 34. And it's going to talk about in Israel carried captive, 2 Chronicles 33, verse 11. Now, of course, that's Manasseh being taken captive. And same thing basically on the 1850 chart. You're going to see that these references, these are going to be for 677 BC. But how did they come up with 677 BC? Does anybody know? why they chose 677 BC for the start of the 2520 for Judah.
Is it they were using Usher?
Okay, so they're going to be using Usher. Now, Usher has a fulfillment of the 65 years. That is, Usher uses Isaiah chapter 7 because he has something that he can establish the chronology of the kings of Judah. And he's going to use the 65-year prophecy to establish 677. So Miller does the same thing. That is, he basically uses Usher, and he's using his Bible. So if you go to 2 Chronicles chapter 33, and you look at Usher's dates, and it talks about Manasseh, and you would have to have a Bible that has Usher's dates, but he's going to have verse 11. He's going to have this as 677. Now I have this here because I have the Treasury of Scripture Knowledge, which is very similar to the notes that Dwight uses from the 16 or 17, what is it?
1769 Oxford Revised King James.
Yeah, so these are basically the notes from that. So it says 677 BC, but there is nothing in 2 Chronicles that we could use to date that. That is, it doesn't say, in what year of Manasseh that this occurs. It just says he's going to be taken captive. So the only way that we come up with 677 initially is we use Usher. And Usher uses Isaiah chapter 7 and takes this 65 years as a time prophecy that's going to be marked by Manasseh being taken captive. That is, he has no other evidence. He doesn't have any documentation. He doesn't have Prism B, which is S.R. Hayden's own words, saying that he took Manasseh captive, which we can date to 677. He doesn't have any of that. He just has Isaiah 7, and he works out that the first year of Ahaz is 742 BC. So since he works out that Ahaz is 742 BC, then 65 years is going to bring you to 677.
Isn't it also that we can prove this with 742 BC because of a conjunction of different historical applications or historical events that can be proved?
Okay, so yeah, I see what you're saying is that we have this civil war that's being mentioned in Isaiah chapter 7.
Right.
And this obviously is going to be mentioned in Assyrian history. But remember, Usher doesn't have that. He doesn't have the Assyrian documents. They haven't been found, and they haven't been translated. So when Usher figures out 742 for the first year of Ahaz, he's going to do that from the Bible. He's not going to have this other history.
What I'm asking is, doesn't history give confirmation to what Usher's already done?
Okay. Well, yes and no. Depends on your interpretation of the history. So we know that the Assyrian school in Chicago, so at the University of Chicago, Edwin Thiel was an Assyriologist. So he's a Seventh-day Adventist. And he's the first one under the decisions that were made by the Seventh-day Adventist Church that we're going to have our ministers, our professors, our scholars trained in the churches, the Protestant churches, institutions, or the institutions of the world, in order to be qualified to teach at Adventist institutions. Edwin Thiel is the first one, right? So he's going to go to the Chicago school, and he's going to enter into the Assyrian school at the Chicago University of Chicago. And he gets a degree, and he's going to modify this history. So he's not going to have 742 as the first year of Ahaz. So if you're going to look at what you say is a confirmation, I would say that you don't. That is, the modern scholarship does not confirm 742 BC as the first year of Ahaz. We have to use the Bible to do that. Now, Ussher's ideas about Assyrian chronology that he tried to force the Bible into have since been brought into question. So that is, his ideas of Assyrian chronology are not actually well accepted. So most people don't place the chronology of Assyria the way that Thiel does. And so they still have a disagreement between Assyrian history and biblical history in the way that they do it. The only way you can do it, though, is if you do look at Assyrian history now, it actually does line up with the Bible, but not with the way that Thiel did it. I know it's rather confusing, but so the question is the answer to that question is yes and no. It does affirm it, but not in the way that people have tried to do it. So they actually have a disagreement because they don't have King Ahaz's first year in 742. But yet it does line up with Assyrian history, because 742 does line up with Assyrian history when it's understood correctly. That is, the first year of Ahaz does line up. But they have the first year of Ahaz in, I think, Ussher's or Thiel's date is 739, something like that, or maybe 732. So I think he's 10 years difference. Might be 729. But you see that there's problems here that we're going to have to address. But now we have this 65-year prophecy, and that's what we're gonna look at this in a bit more detail tomorrow, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through each of these dates, 742, 723, 677, and look at the evidence of these dates. Now I'm going to send you another document because I have a number of documents where I go through all of this chronology in detail, and so we can use that. But yeah, so we have Ussher's date of 742. Now, what year of Manasseh's reign does Ussher place the captivity of Manasseh? Does anybody know?
22nd.
Yeah, so he places it in the 22nd. But one of the things about Ussher's chronology of the kings of Judah is it's not 100% accurate. He happens to get 742 correct. But he does it a little bit differently than I do. That is, 742 is the first year of Ahaz's reign. But where does Ussher count the beginning of the year for the kings of Judah? Anybody know? Does he count him in the spring or in the fall? When does the king begin his reign? According to Ussher.
I thought Ussher was counting in the spring.
Okay. It was kind of a trick question. We don't know.
Right.
Because Ussher doesn't actually address the chronology in that much detail. So when Usher deals with when things occur, he's not distinguishing the spring or a fall begin of a king's reign. He's not looking at things in that much detail because he doesn't have enough information to do that. We know that he does consider before the Babylonian captivity, it's possible, because this is before the Babylonian captivity, it appears that Usher believes that the year begins in the fall, and that that the Jews use basically an Egyptian calendar that goes from fall to fall and is 365 days long. Occasionally it's 356. So 365, 366. I think I said that wrong. So that they have a 30-day month, 12 months in a year, and they add 5 or 6 days at the end of the year. This is what Usher believed, which of course is not true. But he doesn't then distinguish a difference between Israel and Judah on when they established the years of their king. So when he says 742 is the first year of Ahaz, that would be from the fall of 743 to the fall of 742. Somewhere there would be his first year. And that he could have become king in the summer of 743. That is, that would be his accession year when his father dies. So there's these different problems that when we try to use Usher isn't very specific. He doesn't have enough information to be as precise as we're being. I believe that this prophecy in Isaiah 7 happens early in 742 BC, actually in the accession year of Ahaz, that is before his first year. And if you look at Isaiah 7 verse 1, it says, it came to pass in the days of Ahaz, the king of Jotham, the son of Uzziah, the king of Judah, that Rezin, the king of Assyria, etc. So when it says in the days of Ahaz, why doesn't it say in the first year of Ahaz? Why does it say in the days of Ahaz?
Was he like is this the accession year, or was he like a co-regent in some way?
Well, it's the accession year, right? So his dad has just died. And we find when we read in Kings that this civil war that's being talked about, that Isaiah is to go to talk to Ahaz about, had already begun in the days of Jotham, right? So Ahaz, what's that?
It mentions the 20th year of Jotham in one of the verses in the Bible. So the thought there about Usher, his thought was that Jotham didn't die, but just sort of abdicated and let Ahaz become king.
Yeah. So now I believe there's a reason why Jotham is, I believe Jotham, his 20th year of Jotham, he's actually dead. He's been dead for a while. So the reason why the Jotham's 20th year is mentioned. So this is, we can look at this tomorrow. But my view is that they're counting the kings of Israel, but they don't want to compare it to Ahaz's reign for some reason, and they choose Jotham or Jotham. So, but my view is that this is in the accession year of Ahaz, accession year, right? So he's not, it's before the spring of 742, before the first day of the first month. His dad has died and he's become king in early 742. And Isaiah is now going to talk to him about the civil war that's already begun. So the civil war has already occurred. So he knows about it, but he's worried about it. And so it couldn't be way later in Ahaz's reign. It'd have to be at the beginning of Ahaz's reign. So we're going to look at that. Hopefully this is interesting to people, that it's not going to get too tedious looking at these things. But we're also going to not just look at the chronology. We're going to look at the significance of what's happening here prophetically. And I'm going to try also to go back to look at how Miller looked at this and to see how Jeff understood Miller. So I don't want to just look at how we came to understand it or what we came to understand, but how this developed, or this understanding developed of 742 and its significance. So we're going to close with a word of prayer. Dear Father in heaven, again, we thank you for this study and for each person who participates in these studies. We need your Holy Spirit to work in our lives. We know, Lord, that there's so much to understand. And in this review of the 2520, we pray, Lord, that our faith can be established, that this is not some false foundation, but is something that you have given us so that we could understand prophecy. Be with each person throughout this day until we meet again. And we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.